want to be a part of it. New York, New York.
What the fuck is this piece of shit?
Welcome, dear viewers. This is Vasil, the backwater librarian, the booktuber who lifts the veil on seldom visited visions of classic weird fiction, no matter how horrible they may be. In this context, we'll be looking today at H.P. Lovecraft's short story He, a kind of a farewell ode of his to the grand but disappointing city of New York. I'll be going through and analyzing the entire story, so be warned of spoilers if you haven't read it. In the video description below, you'll find the link where you can read it in your browser or download it as an ebook. And in case my accent comes across as too thick, you'll find a full English transcript for this video. I might even add some translations later on. With that out of the way, let's jump directly into the story. Lovecraft wrote He in 1925, but published it in 1926, the year he ended his unsuccessful stint as a married and working man in New York City and returned to his native Providence. The story is written in first person, and although the narrator never mentions his name, there is not even the shadow of a pretense that he could be anyone but Lovecraft himself. So as such, this is a deeply personal and heartfelt story for him. The narrator opens it up by sharing his disillusionment with New York City. He had come to the great city, he tells us, to look for inspiration for his poetic endeavors, but has found disappointment instead. In poetic, emotional passages, he tells us how he felt mesmerized when he glimpsed the grand city for the first time, which happened to be at the onset of evening. He contrasts this to his later experience when he was able to roam through its streets by day and witness firsthand its decay, its squalor, and, most of all, the complete loss of its old American identity at the hands of newly arrived heterogeneous immigrant masses. How dare you, you vile racist? Don't worry, we'll touch upon that topic as well. First, I'd like to mention that when rereading the story for the purposes of this video, I was blown away at how poetic, how beautiful and satisfying his prose here is. Stylistically, he's on top of his game in this one. I mean, just take a listen to the following sentence and tell me it's not enchanting. Coming for the first time upon the town, I had seen it in the sunset from a bridge, majestic above its waters, its incredible peaks and pyramids rising flower-like and delicate from pools of violet mist to play with the flaming golden clouds and the first stars of evening. As I said, this idyllic mirage falls apart as soon as he gets the opportunity to observe the city up close by daylight, and this leads him to proclaim that this city of stone and strider is not a sentient perpetuation of old New York, as London is of old London and Paris of old Paris, but it is in fact quite dead, its sprawling body imperfectly embalmed and infested with queer animate things which have nothing to do with it as it was in life. Poor Howard, your comparison might have held water 100 years ago when you wrote the story, but if you could only see what has become of London and Paris nowadays. I find this observation of a cultural, spiritual death of a city very insightful and absolutely correct. I feel Lovecraft 100%, as I experienced the exact same disappointment when I visited Rome in 2004, exactly 20 years ago. I went there as a young, idealistic high schooler, a lover of all things ancient Roman, expecting a spiritually enriching trip back in time. Silly me. While there was some of that as well, my main takeaway from the visit was how chaotic, dysfunctional and downright dangerous the once great city of Rome has become. The first 2 points can be explained by the unchecked growth of tourism, masses of foreign, needy tourists overwhelming both the limited infrastructure as well as the nerves of the fed-up locals. The third point, however, I blame squarely on out-of-control, mostly illegal, mass migration. Aggressive flower sellers at Fontana di Trevi, all sorts of scammers in front of the Colosseum, cutthroat thieves and bandits at Termini. None of these troublemakers, none of these human wolves were actually Italian. Make of that fact what you will. I shudder to think how Rome, and frankly the whole of Italy, looks nowadays after 20 years of unrelenting illegal immigration. So yes, Lovecraft was right. Supplant the indigenous population of a given place by people of different origin, language and customs, be they constantly rotating throngs of tourists or permanent mass migration invaders. And, surprise, surprise, said place will inevitably lose its original cultural makeup. Pointing out this obvious fact makes you a realist, not a racist. All is not yet lost for our narrator though, as he recovers from the initial shock and falls into a kind of resignation. He decides to limit himself to nightly wanderings only, during which he can still feel the original soul of the city and which even enable him to squeeze out a few poems. It is during one of these nightly escapades in the area of Manhattan known as Greenwich Village that he meets him. The person in question is an elderly man of very thin stature and noble complexion, dressed in strange, outdated fashion. A wide-brimmed hat, an out-of-date cloak, as well as full mid-Georgian costume and buckled shoes, as revealed a bit later on. In short, this weird gentleman looks as if he had been magically plucked straight from the 18th century and transported to New York of the 1920s. He introduces himself to our narrator as an antiquarian and a connoisseur of the secrets of old New York. He states he had noticed the narrator several times during his wanderings and, taking him for a kindred antiquarian spirit, offers to guide him in exploring the city's mysteries. The narrator accepts this offer as in those dreary days, he says, the quest for antique beauty and mystery was all that he had to keep his soul alive. So off they go through unknown back alleys of Greenwich Village. Before we continue, I'd like to touch a bit upon the appearance of this 18th century figure. This character is also in a way a reflection of Lovecraft himself. No, really, hear me out. We know that Lovecraft perceived himself as a man out of time, and it was in his letters, I believe, where he complained that he had been born in the wrong time period. He would imagine himself ideally as a gentleman of the 18th century, a man of letters and learning, but also proficient in horsemanship and fencing, the staples of a real aristocrat of the time. This means that, in a way, we get a double dose of Lovecraft in this story, the unnamed narrator being a carbon copy of his real self, while the mysterious stranger in the night, a reflection, albeit emaciated and troubled, of his imaginary 18th century self. There follows another beautiful and poetic passage in which the narrator recounts their 1-hour journey on foot through what seems a maze of endless hidden alleys, backyards, and even a low tunnel-like arched passage whose length and twists make the narrator lose any semblance of orientation. As they penetrate deeper into this Greenwich labyrinth, it feels as if they're moving back in time as well, as the street layout and architecture resemble more and more those of an earlier colonial era. This nighttime episode is not entirely fictitious, as Lovecraft, the out-of-place eccentric that he was, used to indeed haunt old New York neighborhoods, especially at night, roaming by foot through their intersecting streets and alleys, soaking in the old architecture and atmosphere, seeking inspiration for his creative endeavors. And this is exactly how this story was written to begin with. After an all-night tour of the antiquities of the New York metropolitan area, by 7 a.m. on August the 11th, Lovecraft had reached Elizabeth, New Jersey by ferry. He purchased a 10-cent composition book, you can tell this was way back before the inflation, went to Scott Park, seated himself on a bench and wrote the entire story then and there. No sleep, no nothing. Man, what a Sigma grindset this guy possessed. The actual location of the story is Greenwich Village, specifically a courtyard off Perry Street that HPL had explored on multiple occasions. Moreover, he knew that a luxuriant mansion was built in the block bounded by Perry, Charles, Bleecker, and West 4th Streets sometime between 1726 and 1744, being the residence of a succession of wealthy citizens until it was razed in 1865. This is clearly the manor house of the archaic gentleman of the story. So, the two protagonists reach this manor at the end of their winding journey, and the narrator is led into a large library room, richly furnished in the manner of the 18th century. Family portraits of fine workmanship, once apparently vivid, but now dimmed and tarnished, adorn the walls. The dust and mustiness of long years are palpable in the air. Having showcased the past glory of the place, the stranger proclaims to our narrator that it is out of reverence for these ancestors of his he wears clothing in the fashion of their bygone era, thus elegantly explaining away his unusual appearance. Then he goes on to confide to him why he is so stubbornly holding on to this antique manor. The squire, his ancestor, who moved into it in 1768, studied certain arts and made certain discoveries connected with strange phenomena linked to this particular plot of ground. And Thus it needs to be very closely guarded, he concludes. This rather unexpected turn of events does start to raise alarm bells in the narrator's head, but he dismisses them, thinking that the man is simply an old eccentric. Besides, whatever forbidden knowledge he may turn out to possess, it could be hardly more terrifying than the daylight reality of squalid, migrant-infested New York. The stranger expands on the history of his ancestor, the squire, relating how he let a group of local Indians enter the grounds of his estate, grounds which were apparently sacred to them and where they performed certain rituals. The trade-off had been, of course, that they had to let him in on their secrets. The Indians had learned these in their turn, both from their own ancestors, but also from an old Dutchman in the time of the States General. Whatever those secrets may have been, it wasn't long till the squire was the only living person in their possession, since he had gone on to serve to the Indians monstrous bad rum, whether intentionally or not. Spoiler alert, it must have been intentional. He then supplemented this knowledge both with studies at Oxford and consultations with an old chemist and astrologer in Paris. What all of this forbidden knowledge might have been is only hinted at through cryptic language, but the gist of it is that the world is only a reflection of our intellects, and as such, apparently in certain physical locations more so than in others, it can be remodeled after our wishes. Now, the stranger concedes that he is skeptical as to how much of this assumed principle is actually true, but he does confirm that it can at least provide an exciting spectacle from time to time. Having made this revelation, the stranger invites the narrator to the window in order to showcase this phenomenon to him. Now, did the plot thicken or what? Before we proceed to the climax of the story, I'd like to briefly mention that Lovecraft had again done his homework. The Greenwich Village area used to be indeed inhabited by Indians, their name for the locality being Sapochanican. As for the old Dutchmen the Indians themselves partially derived their knowledge from, I'd like to think of him as some ancestor of Robert Sudam, the main villain, if you will, from the Horror at Red Hook. Lovecraft wrote that story just some 10 days prior to this one, and I believe the Kabbalistic Dutch Sudam family is a nice little tie-in between these two stories. I'd like to hear your opinion on this though. Did Lovecraft really drop an Easter egg, or am I just imagining things? Oh, by the way, do also let me know if you'd like me to make a dedicated video on the Horror at Red Hook as well. Should I crack open that huge can of worms? The 18th century looking stranger brings the narrator to one of the windows in the room and pulls back the dusty curtains. There's a final alarm bell in the narrator's head, but he brushes it aside. Whatever this poor eccentric is about to show him could not be worse than the sheer horror of New York's reality. As if with a wave of his hand, the man produces a kind of a heat lightning at the window which changes the scene. Instead of a nighttime New York cityscape, the narrator can now see the surroundings in their pristine natural state as they were before New York was settled and apparently even before the advent of man. The stranger then changes the scene to something a bit more familiar. Greenwich Village of old, with its sparse houses and lovely green lanes and fields, as it had been before it was swallowed up by the unrelenting urban sprawl of New York. Impressed, the narrator gets hungry for more and asks his host if he can show him a vision of the far future. Half proudly, half malevolently, the stranger grants him this wish, adding that what I have seen would blast ye to a mad statue of stone. What follows is one of the most harrowing visions I've ever come across in literature, and I could only do it justice if I read it out to you as Lovecraft himself wrote it. For full 3 seconds I could glimpse that pandemoniac sight, and in those seconds I saw a vista which will ever afterward torment me in my dreams. I saw the heavens verminous with strange flying things, and beneath them a hellish black city of giant stone terraces with impious pyramids flung savagely to the moon and devil lights burning from unnumbered windows. And swarming loathsomely on aerial galleries I saw the yellow, squint-eyed people of that city, robed horribly in orange and red, and dancing insanely to the pounding of fevered kettle drums, the clatter of obscene crotala, and the maniacal moaning of muted horns whose ceaseless dirges rose and fell undulantly like the waves of an unhallowed ocean of bitumen. I saw this vista, I say, and heard as with the mind's ear the blasphemous Dom Daniel of cacophony which companioned it. It was the shrieking fulfillment of all the horror which that corpse city had ever stirred in my soul, and forgetting every injunction to silence, I screamed and screamed and screamed as my nerves gave way and the walls quivered about me. Wow, what did we just witness, you guys? I've read somewhere a theory of how what the narrator sees is actually the plateau of Leng. I wouldn't be so sure, to be honest, given in some of his stories even Lovecraft himself shows doubts as to the exact location in space and time of this nightmarish plateau, but then in some others its location is hinted at being either in Antarctica or in Central Asia. A version of the plateau also exists in the far northern reaches of the Dreamlands, as famously depicted in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. But the plateau of Leng in North America? That would be a bit of a stretch in my humble opinion. Another theory I've come across states that this is a vision of the Empire of Tsan Chan. Now, the cruel Empire of Tsan Chan, as Lovecraft somewhat amusingly calls it, is mentioned only twice in his entire opus, and is described in even vaguer terms than the plateau of Leng. We only know that it is to come about around 5000 AD, and apart from its epithet as being cruel and its Chinese-sounding name, we don't have that much to go off of. So I would handily discard this theory as well. In the end, I'd say we shouldn't bother ourselves too much with trying to place this vision of the future into a precise context of Lovecraft's fiction, as I'm pretty sure neither did Lovecraft himself. Same as elsewhere in his stories, his main goal with this soul-shaking scene, I think, was to convey an idea rather than to create some precise canon. Much as like old Castro in The Call of Cthulhu boasts about a pandemoniac future when the reason old ones would teach their human followers new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, so too are we here, transported to a time where everything we deem normal, sane, human and aesthetic has been extinguished and supplanted by abnormal, bizarre, repulsive, insane ways of existence. It is a mirror image of the lost and corrupted New York of the author's own time, just amplified to the nth degree. Now events start unraveling rather quickly. The uncontrolled scream of the narrator frightens his host, but for a very strange reason. It had apparently been so piercing that it has somehow called them, and they are now coming for him, meaning for the stranger. Some violent movement is heard on the steps outside and eventually insistent rapping at the door. In his fury against the narrator, the stranger tries to grasp at him, but incidentally brings down the window curtains as well. Full moonlight floods the room, and this has the effect of not only showing the full extent of its decay, but also somehow shrinking and wearing down the stranger's body until only his still living head is left evilly rolling on the floor. Whatever is behind the door starts breaking it down, and soon enough the narrator glimpses the head of a tomahawk tearing through it. In a matter of seconds, the door is completely obliterated, and in comes a colossal, shapeless influx of inky substance starred with shining, malevolent eyes. This detestable goo then goes on to swallow the stranger's head within it and rushes down the stairs as quickly as it had come up. During this entire sequence, the narrator is riveted in place with shock and horror. Probably because of the weight of the amorphous creature, the rotten floor collapses, and the narrator finds himself falling down to the ground floor. He runs in a frenzy to the shuttered front entrance and manages to break and escape through a window before the ground floor in its turn could collapse into the basement. Once out on the unkempt courtyard, he realizes the gate is also locked, and so he has to climb the high courtyard wall. As soon as he's on top of it, however, dizziness overcomes him and he plunges onto the street beyond the wall, fainting. Passers-by find the narrator sometime afterwards, bloodied, bruised, and with several broken bones at the entrance of a small court off Perry Street. It is clear that he must have crawled in a half-conscious state for quite some time. The gathering rain effaces his trails, however, and so the exact location of the nightmarish house remains a mystery. And it is probably for the best, as the narrator ends the story with the following paragraph. I never sought to return to those tenebrous labyrinths, nor would I direct any sane man thither if I could. Of who or what that ancient creature was, I have no idea. But I repeat that the city is dead and full of unsuspected horrors. Whither he has gone, I do not know. But I have gone home to the pure New England lanes up which fragrant sea winds sweep at evening. Wow, what a tense and action-packed ending. There are a couple of things I'd like to unpack here. Firstly, it becomes clear that the stranger, who ultimately suffers at the hands of the amorphous monstrosity, is none other than the 18th century squire who had, back in the day by coercion, acquired the forbidden knowledge from the local Indians. He had apparently succeeded, by the miracle of some unhallowed arts, to extend his lifetime beyond what is humanly possible. The trope of extended lifespan is not unusual in Lovecraft. Let's just remember Dr. Munoz from Cool Air or Joseph Curwen from The Case of Charles Dexter Ward. And secondly, the shapeless, eye-studded monster, which somehow resembles a Shoggoth, but not quite, is actually a perverted amalgamation of the poisoned Indians who've now come to exact their revenge upon the backstabbing squire. But what do these politically incorrect ramblings of a xenophobic Rhode Islander from 100 years ago have to do at all with our modern, progressive world? Someone may ask. Well, not so fast. You see, in a way, Lovecraft did again predict the future. Maybe we don't have black pyramids populated by dwellers horribly clothed in orange and red, although I wouldn't be so sure about that either. But it is true that, what through mass immigration, what through deliberate cultural erosion, the once great cities of the West have deteriorated to such an extent that they are practically unrecognizable. London, Paris, Marseille, Rome, Berlin, Vienna, Los Angeles, and the list goes on. Even the city from this story, New York, the great apple itself, the proud showcase of the once successful American melting pot, is now struggling under the weight of unbridled illegal immigration introduced by the Biden regime and is slowly turning into a no man's land. So, with all this said and done, where does this story fit into Lovecraft's opus? I like to look at it as a gateway into the best period of his writing career. This was the moment, it seems, he made the decision to put an end to his unsuccessful 2-year stint as a married and working man in New York City and to return to his native Providence, living out the final 11 years or so of his life in relative scarcity and obscurity, but also in a fairly productive writing spirit. Now, I'm not trying to throw married and working men under the bus. Hey, I'm one of them myself. But was Lovecraft really cut of that same cloth? I personally don't think so. I wouldn't speculate on how his writing might have evolved had he remained married and living in New York, but one thing is for sure. His move back to Providence enabled him to write his most iconic stories, the core texts of the now so widely popular Cthulhu mythos. The Call of Cthulhu, The Shadow over Innsmouth, The Color Out of Space, At the Mountains of Madness, you name it. There's one last point I want to touch upon and then I'm wrapping this video up, I promise. This is namely one of Lovecraft's stories where you can very palpably feel how his fear of the ongoing ethnic and cultural shift of his country, of the loss of character and tradition of its cities, has informed his bleak outlook on humanity's future, his chilling concept of cosmic horror. And with how things have developed in our modern day, can you really blame him? I can't find any fault with this story, you guys. I know, there is no comparing it to some of his later cosmic horror heavy hitters, but for the short, sincere, personal, poetic story that it is, he, by H.P. Lovecraft, deserves full 5 stars. That would be it for today, guys. I'd be more than happy to read from you in the comments. How do you find this not so often discussed Lovecraft story and my humble commentary on it? Is there any particular story of his you'd like me to analyze next? And if you found this video to be right down your alley and would like to see more from where it came from, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, feel free to check out some of my other Lovecraft related videos. And remember, the Backwater Librarian guides you through the obscure pathways of literature. Thank you for watching and pleasant reading.